Do you ever get nervous when giving a public speech or a live presentation? Or are you interested in becoming a better public speaker and storyteller? The answer to any of these questions is yes, and I've got some really great tips to share with you about how you can become a better, more confident, and effective communicator. And to do this, I'm going to be drawing on some lessons from Chernobyl. Okay, so you might be wondering, what the heck does a nuclear disaster have to do with public speaking? Well, what I actually want to talk about is the HBO hit miniseries Chernobyl, specifically the events that transpire in the season finale, where scientist Valery Legasov, played by actor Jared Harris, has to give court testimony about the series of events that led up to the catastrophe. But let's take a step back for a second. Giving live presentations or public speeches isn't something that comes naturally to everybody. Some people really love it, and some people really hate it. But like it or hate it, it's something that almost everyone comes across at some point in their life. But even the most skilled public speakers understand the importance of being a good storyteller. And they'll also adhere to some important storytelling principles when they're giving great presentations. And it doesn't really matter if you're giving a presentation in a boardroom at work, teaching a classroom full of students, or giving a keynote in some big auditorium. Following some of these storytelling principles can help even the most nervous public speakers give great presentations. And this is where HBO's miniseries Chernobyl comes in. It's a great show, it's really well written, it's well acted, and it's beautifully shot. But I'm not really here to review it. What I am here to tell you is that Jared Harris's performance in the season finale teaches 4 very important lessons about being a great public speaker and storyteller. So let's just jump straight into it. If you haven't actually watched the TV show, it tells the story of a nuclear disaster that took place in the city of Chernobyl in 1986. The series is mainly told from the perspective of a chemist and scientist named Valery Legasov, played by Jared Harris, who is someone who is actually tasked with both investigating the events that led up to the catastrophe, but also he played a key role in containing the disaster. The series finale culminates in a court hearing where Legasov must testify on what exactly went wrong at Chernobyl. Overall, the series is fantastic, but it was these court hearing scenes that both solidified my love for this show, but also got me thinking about what aspiring storytellers can really learn from it. If you haven't yet watched it, I really recommend that you check it out. But even if it's not your thing, the series finale has what I think is a masterclass in effective storytelling. You see, Legasov was tasked with explaining the science of nuclear reactivity to essentially a generalist audience. I'm not actually sure how much of these court hearings were based on fact, but even if this entire part of the series was a work of fiction, the lessons we can take away from it remain the same. Overall, there are 4 things about Legasov's testimony that I think all storytellers, both expert and aspiring alike, need to take note of. And these 4 things include: 1, Legasov demonstrates his expertise to his audience. 2, he empathizes with his audience. 3, he's prepared for the task at hand. And 4, he uses abstractions very effectively. Let's break down each one of these in detail. First and foremost, Legasov demonstrates his knowledge and expertise in the science of nuclear reactivity, how RBMK reactors work, and what series of events led to the eventual meltdown of Chernobyl. Consider for a moment Legasov's audience, which would have been made up of a mix of the general public, lawyers and litigators, Soviet government personnel, etc. Most of these people would have probably had little to no understanding of the topic that Legasov had to talk about. But it's also important to keep in mind that we, the viewers of the show, are also part of the audience, because the show has to communicate to us the core concepts at play here so we can follow along in the show. Legasov is so effective in his presentation because he builds trust and a rapport with his audience by demonstrating his expertise on the subject matter. This is a really important dynamic to get right, because when you are giving a presentation, you need to show the audience that you know what you're talking about. So never go into a presentation without a firm grasp of the underlying subject matter that you're going to be presenting. Remember, when you're giving a presentation, you're the center of attention, and everyone in that room is relying on your wisdom and your knowledge to teach them something. Now, on the other hand, sometimes you might be very knowledgeable and confident in your knowledge, but the other thing you need to remember when demonstrating your expertise is that the delivery really matters. There are some experts that can have a real chip on their shoulders, and when they present, it can come off as condescending and pompous, and nobody likes to listen to an arrogant public speaker. Legasov connects with his audience by balancing his expertise with a certain level of respect for his audience. So always demonstrate your expertise to let your audience know that you're the real deal. This helps build trust, and the sooner you do this in a presentation, the sooner you might start seeing some nods and smiles in the audience. And this can help you become more comfortable if you are generally generally a more nervous public speaker. And of course, the other thing to keep in mind is that it's really important to be respectful of your audience and to not come off as being arrogant or condescending. The second thing that's amazing about Legasov's presentation is empathy. What I mean by this is he understood that his audience wouldn't have had much of an understanding of the topic, and he delivered a presentation that was accessible to his viewers. In short, he was empathetic to their experiences and their underlying knowledge of the topic. Being a great public speaker requires you to know your audience. Are you addressing a group of generalists or experts? Do they have any understanding or exposure to the subject matter that you're talking about? Do they understand the core concepts, jargon, or vernacular that you might need to talk about? For example, imagine that you're a PhD candidate who's going to be giving a presentation on your latest peer-reviewed article. You would approach this completely differently if you were addressing your academic peers versus addressing a group of generalists. And a common mistake that I often see public speakers make is they don't tailor their presentation to their audience. This is really important even in the world of sales. Imagine for a minute that you were selling enterprise software. You wouldn't pitch to the CEO of a company in the same way that you might pitch to someone who's maybe lower level or more junior. For that CEO, you're going to talk more about high level value and how this can improve the business. But if you're pitching to a more junior group of people who might be the actual users of that software, you're going to talk about things like functional benefits and how this software can improve their lives on a daily basis. And in sales, there's something we call qualifying. Qualifying is the process of collecting information either during or before a meeting to first understand whether the prospect you're talking to is a potential buyer. And second, to understand their needs and pain points so that you can tailor your pitch to address those. Public speakers can leverage the same technique by qualifying their audience beforehand. I give a lot of talks at conferences, and I give guest lectures, and I run hands-on training workshops. And every single time I have a speaking engagement, I try to gather as much information about my audience as possible. For example, if I'm speaking at a conference, I'll reach out to the event organizers and try and get as much information about the attendees as I can. If I'm running some kind of training workshop, I'll actually send a pre-workshop survey out to the students so I can understand a little bit more about their prior exposure to the subject matter and their knowledge levels. In summary, great presenters always seek out information about their audience beforehand, and they'll tailor their presentation content, style, and language accordingly. The third aspect that makes Legasov's presentation fantastic is preparation. His courtroom testimony would not have been so effective if he hadn't have put in so much planning and preparation. A trap that some experts sometimes fall into is that they think that they can just rely on their expertise and not put a lot of planning and preparation into something. And in some cases, this can work out. Sometimes you might get pulled into an impromptu presentation. And some people can think really fast and give a great off-the-cuff presentation with little to no prep time. But these people are a minority. The reality is that the greatest storytellers always combine their expertise with thorough planning and preparation. When I give presentations, I consider who my audience is and the subject matter that I need to speak about. I also think about the room dynamics. For example, am I running a training session in a smaller classroom with road seating or circular tables? Or am I speaking in some big auditorium? All these things will affect things like delivery. And after some initial preparation, I'll generally create an outline of either my speech or my presentation slides so I can iron out my story. And if I'm giving a presentation in a tool like PowerPoint, once I get everything together, at the very end, I'll start adding in storytelling enhancers like slide animations to help augment my story and to give the audience focal points. And once all of this is done, I rehearse. It's a lot of work, but it all pays off. If you tend to be nervous presenting or speaking in front of big groups, preparation will help dampen your nerves. Preparation does mean time, but the more time you put into a presentation, from planning to content creation to rehearsal, the better the outcome will be. The last thing we can learn about Legasov's courtroom testimony is his use of abstraction. What do I mean by this? He starts his testimony by offering his viewers an entry point into what is a very complicated topic. He says, to understand what happened at Chernobyl, you only need to know this. There are essentially two things that happen inside of a nuclear reactor. The reactivity that generates the power either goes up, and this is when Legasov shows a red card, or it goes down, and this is when he shows a blue card. Legasov then builds on this abstraction by using the red and blue cards to introduce different concepts and principles when teaching his audience about nuclear reactivity. For example, at one point in his testimony, when he's talking about the cycle of nuclear reactivity, he holds up a red card that talks about uranium fuel, which demonstrates when nuclear reactivity goes up. Later on, he shows another blue card, which talks about boron control rods, which is an example of when reactivity goes down in the cycle. Ultimately, his presentation offers a simple, accessible, and informative overview of one, how nuclear reactivity works, and two, what were the series of events that caused this cycle to become unbalanced and eventually led to the nuclear meltdown. Watching this series reminded me of a talk from another great storyteller, the late Hans Rosling. A Swedish physician, academic, and fantastic storyteller, Rosling was known for breaking down really complex topics and giving highly engaging presentations. He did this through a number of TED Talks over the years, and he usually presented using a statistical visualization software he developed called Gapminder. Gapminder would essentially animate scatter plots to show how socioeconomic data points, such as income and life expectancy, would trend over time. But it was Rosling's 2010 TED Talk, Global Population Growth Box by Box, that I was reminded of when I was watching Legasov's testimony in episode 5 of Chernobyl. In this presentation, Rosling dropped his usual digital format, powered by his Gapminder software, and instead communicated his data through a series of physical objects. In just 10 minutes, Rosling masterfully educated an auditorium full of people about global population growth trends and the disparities that exist between the industrialized and developing nations of the world using nothing more than IKEA boxes. Given how technically impressive his past Gapminder presentations were, this might sound reductive, but the first time I saw his box by box TED Talk, I can tell you that even after watching all 5 of his past TED Talks, that this presentation was by far his most informative and most engaging yet. Coming back to HBO's Chernobyl, in Legasov's testimony, he used a similar type of abstraction, which was the use of the red and blue cards to really oversimplify something that is really, really complex, which is the science of nuclear reactivity. When he does this in the show, it is incredibly effective because his choice of abstraction is perfectly in tune with his presentation style and his delivery. But furthermore, it works because Legasov takes time in the beginning to demonstrate his expertise on a particular topic by introducing his credentials and explaining at a very high level what nuclear reactivity is. It also works because he empathized with his audience and was respectful of their previous exposure or understanding of the topic. And of course, he was prepared for his presentation. He couldn't have just come up with the red and blue card presentation format right before he walked into that courtroom. He would have had to have sat down and really prepared and thought about how to actually run through and give that presentation. And when you put all those things together with the right choice of abstraction, their end result can be a really creative and highly engaging presentation. So there you have it. HBO's Chernobyl is not just a fantastic show, it has some really valuable lessons about how to be a better public speaker and storyteller. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you got this far, I'd greatly appreciate it if you could drop a like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.